Welcome to a tale that spins like the intricate gears of a jet engine, one that combines the wonders of mechanical engineering with the tumultuous emotions of the human heart. Today, I invite you on a journey that spans the heavens and delves into the hidden chambers of the heart. Our protagonist, a man whose passion for jet engines is rivaled only by his love for his wife, Karen, finds himself drawn into a saga of love, loss, and the search for understanding. This story explores the contrasts life held between the precision of machines and the unpredictability of human relationships. Imagine the silence of an airport observation deck, the anticipation hovering in the air, combined with the roar of a Boeing 737 airplane coming to life. By the way, there will be two endings to this story, so be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss either of them. And she was hiding it. Chapter 1. You couldn't hear the roar of the Boeing 737 turbofan engines from the airport observation deck, but you could see the big airplane shudder when it gets 20,000 pounds of thrust. The jet engine is an amazing creation. It is as beautiful as any work of art and has the deceptive simplicity of a flower, each delicate detail intricately dependent on the others. I have devoted most of my life to a passion for these beautiful and powerful creations. They are the first of my great passions, the second being my wife Karen. My two great loves are my wife and jet engines. It may seem strange to you that I hate airplanes and airports. This is partly because the worst moments in my life have happened in airports. The first time I left home to join the Navy, I said goodbye to my parents at the airport. 4 years later, I came home to the same airport, but with no one else. My parents both died while I was in the service. I'm an only child, and loneliness doesn't describe how I felt coming home. But the worst part was leaving my wife and kids behind and flying off to war, knowing that they would be alone, with no family to rely on, and I would be on the other side of the world fighting a war. That was over 20 years ago. Today, I dropped Karen off at the airport at 5:45 on a rainy fall morning. Being apart for 2 weeks was depressing. We had been married for 26 years. She was leaving to travel across the country to visit our grown children. My wife suffered from empty nest syndrome, or so I thought. I buried my feelings and sent her off with a smile and a request to come home as soon as you can. We have 2 boys. The youngest left home at 18 to attend UCLA, and I've only seen him 4 times since then. Twice he came home, and twice we traveled to California, but none of the 4 visits lasted longer than 2 days. All 4 visits were strangely uncomfortable and awkward. The older boy was a bit more of a homebody. He was very hard to get rid of. He attended a university up the hill from our Victorian-style house, and except for the first semester of his freshman year, lived on the very top floor of our 4-story house. He finished grad school without leaving home, and only moved 6 months ago to take a job in Chicago. Don't get me wrong, I love my sons. When they were little, I enjoyed their company and loved them more than life itself. Now, however, the children I loved are 2 grown men with whom I have nothing in common. In each other's company, we are bored, awkward, and, in my opinion, I think it would be better if we kept our memories of each other. It's different with my wife. She has some inner need for more than I can give her. My oldest son moved to Chicago. For the first few months after he moved, Karen seemed normal, but then it was like I came home and found her in mourning. She was grieving, and there wasn't much I could do about it. Having worked for the New York State Department of Health for 28 years, Karen has a lot of vacation time that she earns every year and accumulates year after year. Since we didn't take a vacation this year, she planned a visit to see the kids, as she called my 2 tall, well-built sons. I was unable to carve out time for my current research work at the university. My current government contract is behind schedule, and the work gave me an excuse not to drag myself across the country to see my children, who would prefer to limit their interaction with me to short phone conversations. I'm going to miss Karen. Like I said, we were together for 26 years more, if you count the courtship. We met when I retired from the Navy after 4 years of service. I'm a mechanical engineer specializing in jet engines. I served aboard an aircraft carrier where I gained a reputation for being someone who could fix anything. I think it's a talent, almost a sense of what's wrong with an engine. I seem to have an uncanny knack for spotting a problem before it occurs and causes the airplane to break down. 4 years of engine repair was more than enough. Working in the Navy was grueling, An aircraft carrier could be a pressure cooker for those in charge, and therefore responsible. Every time an airplane took off, you silently prayed that it would come back in one piece, and more importantly, that you wouldn't miss anything. I met Karen at a health fair at the Empire State Plaza, which locals call the South Mall, about 2 weeks after I got back from the Navy. It's a huge complex. When viewed from the street, or better yet, from across the river, it is an impressive complex of monolithic structures. The most distinctive is a building in the shape of a flying saucer, which gives the shopping center a futuristic look. The saucer is called The Egg and is a theater complex. Inside the mall is a long sterile series of corridors running between the state capitol, the state museum, and state office buildings. The sterility is broken by the collection of contemporary art on display in this public space. Due to the fact that the artwork has been attacked by deranged individuals in the past, a security system has been installed here. After visiting the Civil Service Administration looking for a job, I wandered around the South Trade Center because I had no real job other than the Naval Reserve. I remained in the reserves for many years after I finished active duty. In the hallway of the mall, I walked past tables where medical examinations were being conducted. Karen worked at the tables doing the screening. She is a nurse, but became a healthcare administrator in the state. Her employer had a new commissioner at the time, and he had a strong focus on community outreach. Smiling seductively and blinking her golden brown eyes, she talked me into having my blood pressure checked, which I failed. I could see the worry appear on her pretty oval face as she tossed back her shoulder-length hair. They call her strawberry blonde, a redhead with the very temper that sometimes breaks out. However, her color is more of a golden blonde than a redhead. Brown eyes and hair were an unexpected combination, but together they looked fantastic. "What do you do for a living?" she asked. "Nothing now. Just got out of the Navy," I replied. "Oh, did they check your blood pressure in there?" she asked. "Yeah, it was a little high, but no need to worry. I had a high-pressure job," I said. "And what did you do?" I explained. And then she said, "My blood pressure is 170 over 120, which is too high. I need to have it checked again by my family doctor." Since I didn't have a doctor, she administered the medication the next day. My blood pressure turned out to be normal, and we continued to measure it for a week, getting high, low, and normal readings. She made an appointment for me to go to a military health clinic, where a very experienced doctor explained that I needed to monitor my blood pressure and go on a relaxation or stress reduction program. It's not uncommon. For a while, your body will try to adjust to the absence of the incredible stress you've been experiencing. You can help this by learning to control your stress, he says. I followed the doctor's recommendation and went back to Karen, telling her that I needed her to help me deal with the stress. I'm sure she didn't buy it, but she apparently wanted to date me as much as I wanted to date her. Our first date was at an Italian restaurant that Karen knew from the neighborhood. It was a great little place with homemade food called Citone's. Unfortunately, it had been gone for years. Over dinner, Karen showed her simmering, extroverted personality and wanted to know all about me and what it was like to serve in the Navy. I must have talked for hours, which is rare for me. She has such an impact on people that Karen makes you want to talk to her. An aircraft carrier is the top line of ships. It's a real floating city. The pilots are the princes of the city, and everything is run by the chief petty officers and a handful of officers, I said. Were you one of the officers? She asked. Not really. I've flown airplanes. When they know you can do the job, they leave you alone. I think my problem was that I took it personally. Too much responsibility can be hard, I said. Your blood pressure is definitely an indication of that, she said. I laughed, even though it wasn't very funny. People don't realize that we're losing as many crew members as pilots. It's a very dangerous environment, full of fire, fuel, and explosives. Accidents happen. You just keep praying, but not on my watch. You know that too often you have no choice but to put someone at risk, I said, and she must have seen that I had fallen into melancholy. Well, visiting all those exotic places must have been fun. Did you have a girl in every port? She asked. Now I laughed. No, I'm afraid I'm out of luck when it comes to ladies, I said. Now you're embarrassing me, a handsome man like you, and I'm willing to bet that in your uniform you're worthy of death, she said. But I was out of luck. When we docked in Manila, my shore leave was cancelled to equip the F-14A with a new radar. Again, when we were in Thailand, I was with a beautiful girl in a bar and the place was raided. But worst of all was the girl I had been dating for 6 months in Sydney. I thought we were serious, and one night we were in a club, and this man came up to her and kissed her hard. He then told me to treat my lady well. When I asked her who it was, she said, "That's my husband." "You're very friendly with your ex," I said. "No, he's my current husband. He and I have an understanding. He doesn't mind me dating," she said. So, like I said, I have no luck with women. Then Karen took my hand and just looked at me with her deep brown eyes. After a moment, she said, "Your luck may have changed, sailor, but not today. I'm a 24-year-old girl, and I need to get to know you better," she said. "That's very good, for I'm just like you, and I think I'm very lucky." 3 months later, I was already working at a university and married to the most wonderful woman in the world. We were both inexperienced, but made up for it before we got married. I think we both wanted to make sure there would be no problems. We didn't have a big wedding as none of us had family. We each had a few cousins in distant places, but no one but a few friends could be invited to the wedding. Karen made a deal with me. "I don't want a big wedding, but a house would be nice," she said. We only waited 9 months before we started trying for a baby. During that time, we were house hunting. We found the perfect house for Karen in one of the old industrial towns on the east side of the river, a huge dilapidated row of houses. It was down the hill from the university where I worked and where our firstborn would one day go to school. The neighborhood was far from ideal, the forgotten core of a dying industrial city. Its Victorian houses had been broken up into tiny apartments for students and the elderly, and the riverfront was buried under layers of dead factories. The house was a 4-story brick building with what is called an English basement, which is a floor half above and half below ground. You get to the second floor by a short staircase called a stoop, and under the stoop is a separate front entrance. Presumably, this is where the word stoop comes from, as you have to bend over to enter the lower door. It was a mid-19th century house, with all the Victorian gingerbread charm and all the problems that entails. By the time we moved in, Karen was pregnant. "I'm the luckiest woman in the world," she said, and I believed her. 25 years later, on a Wednesday morning, I was driving Karen to the airport, unaware of how my life would change, or rather, how it had changed without my knowledge. She called that same evening and every day thereafter. Saturday started out clear and bright. I decided to do the yard. I was just entering our basement to switch from a light leaf rake to a heavy iron rake when I heard the doorbell ring. If I was still in the yard, I wouldn't have heard him. If it was raining and I went to see the new Ben Affleck movie, I wouldn't have answered. It rained on Friday, and the leaves got too heavy for light rakes. But Saturday was sunny and clear. Such are the vagaries of weather and the luck of life. It was this fluke that shattered the myth of my happy marriage. One day it rained, the next day it didn't. I crossed our small lobby, opened the outer door, and saw a small Asian woman standing outside. She was even smaller than she looked at first glance. She wore black leather high-heeled boots on her body. The rest of her clothes, from her expensive black suit to her grey silk blouse, were of a darker shade. She seemed to be dressed a little young for her age, which I estimated to be around my 52, but it suited her. She was the kind of woman who retained the look of rare beauty into old age, and she knew it. Something about her appearance reminded her of Karen. They were very different in appearance, but something about the way they held themselves and looked at you was the same. "Can I help you?" said I. "Yes, I'm looking for Karen," she said, holding out a large rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. She held it with her right hand, leaning it against the iron railing of our staircase. "I'm sorry, but she's not home right now." "Would you like to come in and leave a message?" said I. "Oh, sorry, I missed her. I'm Avril Dumonte. I just stopped on my way to New York to drop off her painting," she said, pointing to a package shaped to fit a rather large piece of art. "You must be her husband, Robert. Would you mind helping me with it? "It got a little heavy between my car and your front door," she said, as she crossed the threshold of our house and tried to lift the painting. I took the bag from her and followed her into the house. She seemed to know the layout of the house and headed straight for the large front room. The way she said her name, as if I should have known her, confused me, as did the fact that she obviously knew me and my house. I'd never met anyone with the last name Dumonte or heard them called that. Avril spoke English with a slight but confident French accent. Her accent matched her name, and I reconsidered my first impression of her race. She wasn't entirely Oriental. I sat Avril down on the old-fashioned couch we had inherited from my wife's mother and offered her a refreshment. She asked for tea. "Formosa by how if you still have it. I'm afraid Karen has me addicted to it," she said, naming the expensive tea my wife loved, and kept on hand for guests and special occasions. "No problem," I said, now thoroughly confused as to how this woman knew my wife so well. After serving my guest tea, I settled down across from her in a large leather recliner chair with my coffee. I'd never gotten around to trying Formosa tea. "Please excuse my appearance. I was working in the yard," I said. "No excuses. You're just as ruggedly handsome as Karen described you. Any mistake is mine. I called this morning, remembering that I had to deliver her portrait. I'm on my way to New York to discuss Philip's retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. I left a message on her mail." "But maybe she didn't get it," she said between sips of tea, as if I should have known who Philip was. "She wouldn't be able to come to you. I suppose she's in California now? Or just arrived, since it's early afternoon here and still morning there." "She's visiting our son Oscar," I said. Oh my God, I should have called sooner. I was so anxious to see her hang it up. I think it's one of Philip's best pieces. It's definitely done with the most love, although a little out of his usual style, she said. I was about to ask her who Philip was, and who she was herself, when she beat me to it, opening the photograph she'd placed beside her on the chair. The brown paper fell with a rustle of wrapping paper that reminded me of the Christmases and birthdays we'd celebrated in this very room. But it should have been a loud scream. I was thrown back against the wings of the chair like a man who sees his life leaving him. The woman in the painting was caught leaning forward to retrieve her pants from the ornate spokeshave-decorated seat of a small, elegant chair. One side of the painting showed a hint of a dressing table. Her golden red hair fluttered around her as if in time with her movements. Gorgeous brown eyes with a golden hue looked out of the painting. She was a true redhead. The light came from the east-facing window at the back of our house, in the bedroom we'd shared for the past 25 years. We had bought this house with the last of my Navy savings and a loan from her state pension. It was a shabby house in a dying section of town that had undergone an amazing renaissance in the intervening time. Our dream home was broken beyond recognition. One of the first things we did was to wallpaper the bedrooms. We bought green and gold striped paper for 30 cents a roll from a store that existed in the old mill town of Cohos at the time. We decorated my future son's room in the style of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. My very pregnant wife and I did everything ourselves. The picture was painted later, after the birth of our second son. Karen still had a small lump in her lower abdomen that persisted for several years after Oscar was born. She eventually got rid of that little bump with yoga and running, but I didn't notice it. The artist didn't miss it, nor the slight smirk that her smile carried. A smile that suggested, "Come here and see what you've got." He was good, maybe even great, I don't know. He drew my wife in the early morning as the sun peeked through our bedroom window against the background of the unmade double bed. She bent over to pick up her pants from her grandmother's dressing table, and I'd seen her do it 1,000 times in this very room. When Avril turned from the picture to me, a satisfied and proud smile appeared on her face, which quickly disappeared. My expression must have said it all. I had no doubt that the picture was of my wife, painted about 20 years ago. How or why, I couldn't say, but any explanation had to involve actions that no faithful wife would engage in. I couldn't believe it. "Oh dear, I thought you knew, for they lived together. They've been lovers for years." "My God, how could you not know?" she said, a concerned frown on her exotic face. "There's some mistake here," I said, grasping at straws. "My wife has lived with me continuously for the last 26 years. This is our bedroom with the wallpaper we glued together. This is our bed that we still sleep on together, I said. I've got to go, she said, rising. No, sit down, I said. You can't spring this on me and then just run away. Who are you? How do you know my wife, me, and for heaven's sake, who Philip is? The story surfaced slowly and reluctantly. Avril's husband, Philippe Dumonte, was an artist and world-renowned restoration expert. In 1989, he was hired to restore 6 paintings that had been vandalized on the South Mall. I remembered the case of a man who fancied himself the reincarnation of Michelangelo and had to fix the paintings. After much searching, the state's General Services Administration hired a Canadian firm to do the restoration. At the time, there was some controversy about hiring out-of-state experts, but the experts were determined. They wanted only the best. Anything less would not satisfy them. Apparently, the choice was Philippe Dumonte. Shortly after Philip started work, an affair began. He met Karen on the South Mall when he was working in the museum building. She was working in the tower building. They were practically in each other's faces. Avril and Philip entered into an open marriage at her insistence. We were young and didn't want to miss anything, but mature enough to understand each other's needs, she said. She was happy he had found someone while he was away. He traveled to and from Montreal, but spent most of his days and nights in Albany for 3 years. Then there was a period beginning in the summer of 1990 when he moved into my house and stayed. Avril visited him on numerous occasions. She knew I was away and still married to Karen, but she never explained the reason. She assumed I knew about their relationship and approved of it. I just assumed she spoke fondly of you and praised you as a husband and father. I realized that Philip moved in with her because you couldn't be with her, and there were such young children, 2 boys who needed a male influence and a single woman. We had 2 girls in their teens who went away to boarding school. Philip spent their vacations with us. Karen spent Christmas 1990 at our home in Mont-Royal. My daughters loved her and the boys as much as I did. How could you not know? All my doubts about her story were dispelled because 1990 was unusual. A monster invaded its oil-rich neighbor and dragged my country and other countries into the war. I foolishly stayed in the Naval Reserve, albeit inactive. I left the Navy as a senior lieutenant, and in the reserves I earned the rank of commander, the result of working in the reserves and on government contracts. My skills were in great demand that August. I was surprised that they waited until Saddam's troops crossed the Kuwait border to engage me. The telegram came on August 6th. I left 2 days later and woke up on August 9th aboard the Ike. The next 10 months of my life were something of a nightmare, playing out over the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq. The only thing that kept me sane was the belief that I had a loving wife and 2 amazing boys waiting for me at home. They were mine, and I was coming home to them. When an engine caught fire, while flying in a Grumman F-14 Tomcat airplane with me, I knew I would survive because Karen was waiting for me. I was flying aboard the Eisenhower to Saudi Arabia. It was January 16th, 1991, the day before the air battle. I wasn't worried. The pilot and I went through all the procedures to restart the engine. Each attempt failed until we made one last Hail Mary attempt. It shouldn't have worked. The book said it wouldn't, but it did. 6 times I saw people die, sometimes so close that I was in their blood. Ropes failed, airplanes crashed, and more people died in my maintenance crews than pilots. That's a fact of war. Collateral casualties are always the largest in number and the least publicized. Accidents happen when people under tremendous pressure try to do things that should be impossible. We've lifted heavier than airships into the sky and brought them down safely, more often than not. No matter. Karen and the boys were waiting safely at home for me. They spent part of Christmas 1990 in Montreal. Until now, I didn't know why. I remember Kevin talking excitedly about being in an unfamiliar city, and the 2 girls, Simone and Susan, being sisters. No one else was mentioned, and it was incomprehensible to a 6-year-old to communicate over a bad phone connection from the other side of the world. I told Karen I loved her every chance I got, but it was infrequent, and apparently it wasn't enough, although the affair had been going on for a year by the time I left. She loves you with all her heart. Philip was her second man, her little passion, her more experienced lover. She didn't have much experience. As the saying goes, they were in love to be in love. They were friends as well as lovers, she said, looking at me as if that explanation was supposed to mean something. When Philip died 3 months ago of a stroke, she came to his funeral. I asked about you and she said you were doing well. She said the last of the boys had moved out and you and she were happy and still loved each other. I was happy for her even in my grief. I brought the painting as Philip had requested that she have it. I should have realized and given it to her then. She is splendid, isn't she? She said, looking at me for confirmation. I got up and walked forward, looking directly at the evidence of my wife's utter betrayal. It's very beautiful. He captured it better than any photograph. He has her accurate. It's a beautiful picture, and especially that cheating girl in it, I said. Avril gasped. No. You have to understand that it was just beauty, innocent love. Please understand, she begged. I could only shake my head. For half an hour she tried to convince me of something, but I wasn't sure what it was. She didn't dare leave the painting, lest I destroy it. He's very valuable. Please promise me you'll get him safely to Karen, she said. Why not? I won't move her. She's nothing to me now. Avril walked away, continuing to explain and crying quietly. Please talk to Karen. Don't do anything stupid. Don't let it bother you, she said as the door closed behind her, and my life as I knew it. My early morning flight from Chicago arrives at LAX airport right on schedule just after noon. Los Angeles is my least favorite city. At least in that sense, I am a typical New Yorker, even though I was born and raised in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. My husband, Rob, is a true New Yorker. A former Navy sailor, I think he would have withered and died in this desert. I am met at the airport by my son Oscar and his friend Mark. Somehow, I wasn't supposed to know that he wasn't standard and that he and Mark were together. 22 years ago, I gave birth to a chubby little angel, weighing 12 pounds 8 kilograms. Now it's a skinny young man, 6'3", who is bearishly hugging me. He's estranged from his father for reasons I don't understand. Rob loves his son, but there is a growing chasm between them. Men are so often a mystery. What is a woman to do? My Rob is what other men call a man's man. He is big, not just tall. His imposing appearance hides how sensitive Rob is. My husband is hurt by his son's rejection of him. He would never stumble over the truth. I'm convinced that there are no problems in the engine that Rob couldn't spot on a cursory inspection, but there are also no attitude problems that he could see without the help of a trained guide dog. With people, he's hopeless. Except, I gather, with men under duress. Then he becomes the inspiration they follow like sheep to the slaughter. I'm not supposed to know, but I do. In the evening, we go to a club for dinner and dancing. It has a Mexican flavor, but the visitors are a mixed group of mostly Anglo-Saxons and Asians. There are a few couples, both male and female. There are often men and women looking at me. In my 50s, I can still do it. My son and his friend think I am ancient, but I put on a skirt and blouse and intend to dance and have fun. I am married, not dead. It's very flattering to be hit on by younger men at 50. I'm not a fool. I have not been fooled. I've had exactly 2 men in my life, both of whom I loved deeply. Robert MacDonald, my Rob, was my first love and will be my last. Philippe Dumonte was my second, and his recent death hit me hard. We were not true lovers for many years, but we had a deep relationship steeped in love, friendship, and deep gratitude on my part. Philip was there for me when I needed him, and my husband was not. An aggressive man, who I estimate to be in his early 30s, asks me to dance. He is shorter than I am in his low heels, but makes up for it with energy. He is the first of a number of men I dance with. I keep an eye on the time. I want to call Rob. I think my husband went to see the movie Argo starring Ben Affleck. He probably got home a little after midnight his time. At 9:30 Pacific time, I pull away from my current dance partner and find a quiet spot by the door of the women's room to make a phone call. My cell phone is off. I switched it off as I boarded the plane this morning. I'm getting old and forgetful, having never managed to turn it back on. I have one missed call from Avril Dumonte, probably reminding me that Philippe's retrospective exhibition is in the planning stages, and I agreed to help. I call Rob, but the call goes to voicemail. I assume he's still on set, or, like me, forgot to turn his phone on. I call his home phone, and get an answering machine. Rob, I arrived safely. Call me when you get this. 2 hours later, I'm dancing and wondering why my husband hasn't called. We head to Oscar and Mark's condominium, where I fall into a jet lag-induced sleep. Waking up too early, I call Rob again. All I get is voicemail. I call the landline. Rob, you left your phone off. Call me. It's 8 in the morning when a sleepy Mark joins me in the kitchen and offers to make breakfast. I agree if he'll let me help. There's still no call from Rob. Now I'm worried and trying to figure out who I should call. I think back to the call from Avril, and a shiver runs through me. No, that was too long ago. I met Philippe Dumonte at the old state dining room in the South Mall. It wasn't the best place if you like to eat. I had a thermos of good dark tea. I don't drink coffee. I had a cheap novel to read, and a 45-minute lunch break. I could have read at my desk, but you have to get out of the office for at least a little while. I read a trashy novel in hopes of regaining my senses. In 4.5 years of marriage, I'd lost them. When I first married Rob, I couldn't spend a day without his attention, but after my second son was born, they were gone. For the last year, I've been half dead. Why don't they tell you this could happen? I still loved my husband deeply. He is the man you dream of marrying as a little girl. He is my Prince Charming. He has dark coal-black hair and sky-blue eyes. A man who could come out of a fairy tale, but he is so shy and quiet. He's not going through a crisis, but I know he feels deeply. I watch him as he reads to our children. I see him bend down to gently kiss their sleeping heads. He is a man of action and courage with a gentle soul. He is the man I want to have by my side forever. I just didn't want to spend the evenings anymore. At first, I thought it would come back on its own. But as time went on, I became more, not less, afraid of evenings with my sweet, loving husband. I became increasingly desperate. I pretended when the excuses became too much. I feared my husband would soon find out the truth. What kind of woman am I? What kind of woman am I? Excuse me, please. I don't like to eat alone. And since I've been watching you for the past few days, you were alone too. Surely this awful book can't be of such interest, he said. This tall, elegant man, with a distinct French accent in his impeccable English. I learned that his name was Philippe Dumonte, an artist by nature and a restorer by profession. He was a little taller than my husband and thinner, what they call a wallflower. On his head was an unruly mop of black hair, flecked with grey as befitted a man of 42. He was therefore more than 12 years older than I was, but in his brilliant blue eyes there was youth and joie de vivre. His angular face was handsome in the Gallic style. I wouldn't eat that if you knew anything about food, I said as he set down his standard tray of chicken, covered in flat pasta gravy and instant mashed potatoes. In just 2 short weeks, I realized that food is a lost art in your Albany, he said, mimicking well the northern New York accent so influenced by western New England. You're being too harsh. You can find good food here, you just have to know where to look, I said. Perhaps you will be my guide. Perhaps we could have dinner some night, he asked. Sorry, can't. Married, I said, flashing my modest wedding and diamond rings. But let me do something about this drink, I said, substituting bagged tea of unknown content from the cafeteria for the brew from my thermos. Ah, what good tea! And beautiful and plentiful. Surely you can spare an evening for your husband to feed a hungry man, he said. In the end, I agreed. I had little chance against his charm and sophistication. Arranging a supposedly late work evening was not difficult. We had dinner, and by 9 o'clock I was home, and I was alive again. I was eager for a good evening. The first beneficiary was Rob that night, but the man I was in the spirit with was a devastating French-Canadian artist. Philippe was a unique personality that knocked me off my feet as a frustrated wife and mother. It only took Philip 3 weeks to spend a most memorable evening with me in his studio in the museum building next door. There were no extremely late nights. I switched hours at work and we spent the morning or afternoon as we pleased. Sometimes we would see each other in the early evening. He was sympathetic to my situation. His wife Avril had a boyfriend whom he referred to as a suitor or companion. His name was Thomas. Philip said that Thomas was younger and therefore compensated for her attachment to children at a young age. As I lay in Philippe's workshop that first time, curled up in his arms, I felt no guilt. I knew guilt was bound to come later, but in that moment, I was at peace. He understood my problem, seemed to feel it. You will regain your desire for your husband. Relax and enjoy, but remember that your husband should be the first to claim your heart and the right to reclaim you when you are ready, he said. It was a fairly ordinary evening, but he knew more than usual. It's mostly happening in the mind. The mind prompts additional action, and we have to help it, he said. Neither Rob nor I were very experienced in hosting evenings together. Philip showed me and practiced how to do it. He showed me every nuance he could possibly know about. It was an explosion of feelings. That's basically what he taught me. How to participate and help my husband. To be active in the relationship and at the same time sometimes to act, not to be the weak side. Who taught you all this? Avril, I asked. No. I taught her just as you did. My mother organized my education, he said. He told me the story of young Philippe and Colette. She was older, the same age as his mother, and was his mother's friend. By profession, she was a companion. That's what he called a mistress. She went from man to man as a kept woman. She wasn't a nightmare, he said. She just wasn't a woman to marry. I didn't call her one, I said. No, but you thought it was my American housewife. You must understand us, he continued. My parents immigrated from England right after the war. The Germans forced them to flee France for England. My mother was a prominent communist before the war. It was easier for them in Canada, but it was never easy. Dad was a museum curator and art historian. He was, of course, an artistic painter. In Canada, Mom worked as a secretary. Colette was a friend from France. Mom felt that evenings together were a natural occurrence, but should be taken seriously. Colette was invited to be my teacher. She was experienced enough for the task. We had classes with her once a week for a year, he finished with a laugh. And now you're going to teach me? I said. But of course, I'm indebted to Colette, he said with another chuckle, which I was starting to like. The biggest challenge for me was the desire and need to share my new knowledge and skills with my husband. I couldn't just sit Rob down and say, "Listen, honey, I met this wonderful French lover, and he taught me everything we were doing wrong in our relationship and a whole bunch of things we should be doing. But you know I'm not creative, to say the least." "What's this?" said Rob, climbing into bed. "The book," I said. "Yes, but the title of the book is The Joy of Married Couples Evenings. Is there something you want to tell me?" "Well, since you asked, I haven't been what I should be as a lover since Oscar was born, and I feel like I need to be active here, so I think you and I need to put our heads together. Let me show you a fact I learned from my relationship with Rob," I said. One evening and one weekend after another, we did it all. Everything Philip taught me, I taught my husband. Before we finished, several books were read. I don't think Rob read any of them, and I was only a cursory reader of the syllabus at the time. Philip was right. I regained my feelings for my husband, if only because I am human. However, all good things come to an end. Philip and I had a good year of what he called an amicable relationship, but I felt increasingly guilty and feared that even my trusting husband would realize it sooner or later. I was on the verge of breaking up with Philip. He and I had talked about it. I think he was concerned that he was getting too attached to me. We had deep feelings for each other, but I wasn't going to leave Rob, and he could never leave Avril. It seemed like it was time for us to move on. The catastrophe broke out on August 6, 1990. It had been building up for several days, but it was on that day that the war began. It wasn't our war, but that didn't matter anymore. Eventually, many would be called up, but not before the jet engine specialist still serving in Pupka's reserve. The telegram came on the 7th, and the next 2 days were hell on earth. I had to keep my spirits upbeat. My husband was leaving, and there was nothing I could do about it. A more ignorant woman would have taken comfort in the fact that her husband would be behind the front lines, but I knew the danger he was in. Worse, I had seen firsthand the effects of the incredible stress he had experienced when he first left the Navy. Rob was older, in great physical shape, but that wouldn't have saved him from a stroke. "You have the blood pressure kit I gave you," I said. "Yeah," Rob said. "Promise to use it every day, twice a day, as instructed, and treat if readings are above normal," he said. "Okay, kiss me and your sons goodbye," I said. We were at the airport. Rob was already in uniform. People were staring. Did they know that I was saying goodbye to my husband, perhaps for the last time? Did they realize that this meant I was an only child in an only child marriage, and both of our parents were dead? Did they see the 2 little boys I now had to support? I wanted to say, I have a big old house that we foolishly bought that eats up money and constantly needs repairs. Who's going to pay for the repairs now? Who's going to pay for the extra childcare I'll need? And who's going to read to my boys at bedtime? I don't know how I got home from the airport. I cried before I even got the boys to the car. Kevin noticed. "Why are you crying?" he asked. "I just miss my dad already," I said. "Please don't cry." "There," I said, wiping my eyes with one hand. Already stopped. But I was still terrified and angry. I was angry with the government and with my husband, because I knew that secretly he liked to fight. They were not at war yet, but the planes were taking off and landing incessantly. I drove my shabby Volvo up to the house, and he was sitting on the porch with his suitcase at his feet. "Philip, what are you doing here?" said I. "Did you think I'd leave you when you needed me?" He replied. And so Philippe Dumonte, restorer and artist, became, if anyone asked, my tenant. I had no relatives or very close friends to know otherwise. We lived in the kind of transitional neighborhood where you knew very few neighbors and only for a short time. Philip moved in with me and laid in my bed. He took on all the burdens that I struggled to bear. He became my support in a cruel world. He used to visit Avril on weekends. Now Avril was coming to visit us. Nights he would fall asleep with her, but during the day, she and I could be a couple. She and I became friends, and to this day, it's the strangest relationship I've ever had. For Christmas 1990, I went with the guys to Montreal. We had the best and worst Christmas of my life. The worst was because Rob was in the Gulf, and I hardly heard from him, just one brief phone call on Christmas Day. It was the best Christmas ever, because I felt like I was part of a family. I had my own position, my own place. The Dumonte family gathered in large groups, sometimes up to 40 people. All relatives of Philippe and Avril. I quickly discovered that I had my place there. I was Philippe's companion. In my naivety, I thought they would see me as an outsider or just tolerate me, but I was wrong. They accepted me as a member of the family. They recognized that if I couldn't be with my husband, I would certainly be with Philippe. After all, it was my place. It was that Christmas that the only mistake was made. Philippe decided he wanted a picture of me in his Montreal home. Something to remember me by. He began planning the picture and sketching. It was to be a picture of me in the morning. He had an amazing memory for details. When we got back to my house, he started working on the painting. I posed for him. It was a labor of love. He finished the painting in March. It was still 3 months before Rob came home. Philip left 2 days before Rob came home. My affair with Philippe lasted for a year. Rob came home in pain. He wasn't himself, and I was still leaning on Philip. Meanwhile, Avril had broken up with Thomas. She needed Philippe, so he started spending more time in Montreal. When his work on the restoration ended, we both realized it was over, but not done. For the next 12 years, we remained close friends, almost family. I called him at least once every 2 weeks. I organized monthly trips out of town so we could be together. When the stroke took my Philip away, I was distraught. After the funeral, we gathered at the Mount Royal house. Avril, myself, and 3 others. We were all his women. All 5 of us were heartbroken. Avril told me that the others meant much less than I did. "You were his special love," she said. "I know you grieve as I do. Such love is a great rarity." She was determined that his work would get the restoration it deserved. She wanted me to be a part of it. "You were such a part of it. It would be right for you to be a part of it," she said. I promised to do my best. With bated breath, I call Avril. "My friend, I'm afraid I've ruined your marriage," she replies. "What's wrong?" I reply, and start sobbing uncontrollably. We're both crying. "I thought he knew," she says. "No, I never found a way to tell him about it." "He's seen the picture." Oh my God. Mark, who was making elaborate French toast with toppings, stops and walks over to me. "Did someone die?" he asks. "No, just my marriage," I say. Avril tells us what she knows, and then Oscar joins us. He's shocked, and I think Mark is too. "Mom, what do you think Dad will do?" asks Oscar. I have no idea, but I need to talk to him and he's not answering his cell phone, I say. We decide to call Kevin. He tries it and calls us back. No go, he won't pick up the phone. You know, he probably blames me for not telling him about Philippe, he says. He's right, of course. I've drilled into my 6-year-old son that he should never mention Philippe or the Dumontet family. My little boy had my back. Now he'll pay for his childish devotion to his mother. Oscar tries next, but he's already too estranged from his father. Rob has cut himself off from his family, and it's my fault. For the rest of the day, we try to find a plane home for me. Eventually, I manage to book a ticket on a Red Air flight that leaves Monday night and arrives Tuesday morning. At 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, I get home a week early. Rob isn't home. I assume he's at work. I can see that as soon as I walk into the front living room. On my mom's chair is a picture of me that Philippe drew. No one could look at that picture and not know that Philippe Dumontet was my lover. I fall to my knees and start crying. Why is this happening now? I decide that I only have one chance to confess everything and pray that Rob can get over it. I'm not ashamed of what I did, nor am I sorry. I just hate that Rob knows about it and is in so much pain. It's just not fair. None of us did anything wrong. Why do we have to suffer? I decide it's best to make Rob a nice dinner and try to talk. I need to explain the unexplainable. I decide to make macaroni and cheese. I have a special recipe that I developed because it's Rob's favorite dish. I reduce the fat and salt by substituting chicken broth and tomatoes for the cheese and milk. It's not healthy, but it's better for you. I make it rarely as a treat. I try my best. I choose what outfit to wear. The goal is to be attractive, but not too much so. I want to look desirable without assuming I'm easy. I have to make sure Rob realizes that Philip was the only man, and that it wasn't a sordid affair. I was and still am a good woman and wife. By 6:30, I'm sitting in the living room. I put the painting in the hall closet, carefully wrapped in an old blanket. Dinner is prepared. 2 bottles of white wine are chilling in the refrigerator. I'm wearing a pink tea dress that emphasizes my hair. I'm as ready as I've ever been. I can hear Rob on the back stairs. He's not coming in. He's heading straight for the 4th floor apartment. I wait for him to come down, but he doesn't. So much for my plan to meet him in the living room. I take the front stairs to the 4th floor. There's a small landing at the top, and then an interior door with a pretty serious lock. I knock on the inner door. Rob, I'm home, I say, but there's no answer. I hear movement inside. Please, Rob, I've made dinner, mac and cheese. We can eat and talk. Please, Rob, let me at least try to explain, I say in the silence that ensues. I'll wait downstairs, I say before walking away. That night, he doesn't come down. He lives on the 4th floor, and I live in the rest of the house. We don't talk or socialize. Every night I go up and take him out to dinner. This goes on for 2 weeks. Avril calls every day and sympathizes with me. Have you talked yet? She asks. No, I'm getting the silent treatment. Oh God, why doesn't he understand? If only Philip were here. I can hear in her voice how lonely and lost she is. This is an exhibition we're talking about. She is having difficulty dealing with the museum bureaucracy. There are about 600 possible works, but they are in different hands, and acquiring them for the exhibition requires more effort than the museum wants to spend. She needs help, but she insists that I talk to Rob first. On Friday of week 3, I'd had enough, and she was hiding it. Chapter 2. I knock resolutely on the door of the 4th floor apartment and say, Robert MacDonald, this is your wife, the woman you've been married to for the last 25 years. I am the mother of your 2 sons and the man who loves you more than his own life. I have always loved you and always will, but I want to tell you a love story that involves me and someone else. After all we've meant to each other all these years, you need to hear me out. I'll be downstairs with dinner waiting for me. You can eat and then listen to my story, I say through the tightly closed door. About an hour later, he comes down for dinner. I have some expensive steaks and a bottle of good Cabernet. We eat, and then I start. I talk to him from the heart. I don't lie and I don't cover up. Rob's hiding from the truth is over. I met a wonderful man who was there for me when I needed him. First, he helped me with delicate matters when I was in a terrible situation. And then he took care of my children and me when I was alone. I begin. Something was wrong. You could feel it in the sound of the engines. The F-14 Tomcat was sluggish. Its performance was clearly impaired. The pilot didn't seem to notice it, but I knew. Before dawn, we were ejected from the deck of the USS Eisenhower. We were on our way to Riyadh, and one last meeting, hurried, rushed like everything else. We were going to war. All the preparations were made. I had to see to the last details and return in time to see the first airplanes. The war was 1 day away. When the sun came up, we were flying at over 20,000 feet above the speed of sound. The engines cut out. The momentum carried the airplane forward, but not for long. The 43,000-pound plane won't fly for long. Then it will fall. It wouldn't glide, it wouldn't maneuver, it would fall. The pilot conducted a restart. Nothing. Again, nothing. We began to fall into the dark sea. "Time to taxi, sir," he asked in a voice that should have been impassive, but which gave away every pilot's worst fear. "Reboot," I said. Nothing. Faster and faster. It falls into the dark water. "Turn off the fuel and try again," I said. "That's crazy." "Do it now." I woke up to the fact that we had fallen into the water. It wasn't the first time I'd had this dream. It was the first time I woke up alone in bed. It was always Karen with me before. Unlike the dream in real life, the airplane's engine started. The problem was the fuel. It was contaminated. One of those mistakes that happen on the road to war. Ultimately, it's my own fault as the person in charge. But we got lucky. I caught it, nearly taking my life. The emergency reserve was unharmed. The engine started on the reserve tank as soon as the main supply was cut off. We immediately headed back out, and I checked all the fuel. My flight to Riyadh that day was at Mach 2. There was no way I could have gotten out of formation and come back to fix the problem. I can only imagine how many airplanes we could have lost, but the engines told me, and I caught the problem. Why had I fallen into the water in my dream, since I had lost Karen? The fact of that loss hit me harder than death. There is a knock on the back door. There's a short porch by the back stairs. Someone is there. I open the door, and Avril Dumonte walks in stilettos. She came to visit a week after Karen and I talked about Philip. The conversation about what they did. Karen somehow expected me to shrug my shoulders and put it behind me. I couldn't and retreated to my 4th-floor apartment. "Mon Dieu, such a scream," Avril says. "Sorry to bother you, but what are you doing here?" said I. "I was sitting on the top veranda when you shouted. The view of the university from the top of the hill is so beautiful." "Sorry, bad dream, but come on, I'll show you the river," I said. We walked to the front of the house. She is wearing a McGill t-shirt, blue jeans, and these extravagant heeled shoes. The shirt and jeans must be really small. They're as tight as anything I've ever seen. The outfit is too skimpy for an October morning, but I can barely speak. I'm in just boxers. "I can't look outside. The windows are too high up," she says. "Come up here," I said. I led her upstairs where the attic was set up. The 4th floor had been added as a raised floor. It was built to make the house look like an ornate Italianate style, rather than Greek classical. We built an apartment and rented it out for a while until our finances improved. Eventually, my oldest son took it over. The front of the apartment had a cathedral ceiling with a large sleeping loft built into it. I now escorted Avril into the attic. Her short figure was perfect for the place. The dormer windows look so small from the outside, but I could stand in them. "And you're right. The view of the river is just breathtaking," she said. "Glad you like it. You have a beautiful home. It's bigger than our house in Mont-Royal, but it's too big for 2 people. Even for those who intend to live apart," she said in a scolding tone. "Well, you've seen the view," I said. "I'm not done yet. We need to talk," she said, looking me over from head to toe. "You're an attractive man. Men like that shouldn't sleep alone with their nightmares," she said. "Circumstances got the best of me," I said, trying to put some sarcasm in my voice. "What a foolish man you are. The most beautiful woman who loves you sleeps alone with her bad dreams in this very house," she said, as she went down to the living room. "What do you want, Mrs. Dumonte?" said I. "I want you to stop hating my poor Philip, who can no longer defend himself." "What makes you think I hate him?" "Now you think I'm stupid," she said, as she sat down at the table. "Coffee would be handy while we talk." I should kick her out, I thought. She is dangerous, but how ridiculous for a man to be afraid of such a small creature. "Don't you want some tea?" I asked. No coffee this morning. We have serious things to discuss, she said. It takes me a few minutes to make coffee while I watch her. She keeps her cool and feels quite comfortable sitting in a room with a man like that. I, on the other hand, feel awkward and out of place. I take cream and sugar. Not black and bitter like some barbaric American, she says with a note of laughter in her voice. She knows how I drink my coffee. What else does she know about me? All I know is that she's the widow of the man who seduced my wife. I set the coffee with cream and sugar in front of her. I turn around to put on my sweater. Don't put it on. I am an old woman, and so I am enjoying myself. Don't deprive me of the pleasure, she said. I hesitate, but still sit down in my boxers and sip my coffee. We have a lot in common, Avril Dumonte began. We married people who are passionate, but also quite reserved and introverted. Perhaps the biggest difference between us that I've noticed is that where you're shy, I'm not. Maybe that's why we reacted so differently, or maybe it's the difference in genders or cultures or whatever. My mother was a war bride. She was Japanese and moved to Montreal after the World War, following my French-Canadian father. I was their fourth child, their last, and their only girl. It wasn't easy being half Japanese after the war. It's not easy now, but my Philippe has never seen me like this. If you could have known him, what a man he was. Tall and elegant, he towered above the crowd. But I'm not just talking about physical appearance. He had a gift, and he shone with that light of genius. Philip was a great artist, even at the age of 26. He walked around the McGill campus like a prince. He was a drawing instructor and a professor of conservation. I was a humble first-year student. I worshipped at the altar of this animated Phoebus, a little swarthy girl, half this, half that. That he paid attention to me at all was a miracle. But when he kissed me, I suffered a horrible death. Do you know what that is? The little death that lovers experience when they feel their breath leave them and their heart stop. Why we got married, I don't know. We were so wrong, and neither family was happy. Philip had the most meager income. I was not yet 19. A silly girl, but so much in love. We lived on him fixing other people's work because it paid. He should have taken up painting, but I got pregnant too soon. Things were different then. Birth control wasn't as reliable. We could have done something about it, but we were too Catholic to live with it. We were poor. We had nothing but children and love. So much love. I would never be so happy again. But I knew it couldn't last. It was too heavy for me. Simone was 7 and Susanna was 5 when I noticed the discontent in him. The evenings were still extraordinary, but there was a gleam in his eyes. He had a great need, a great talent, and a great appetite for life. What would you have me do? Hug him so tightly that I would strangle the life out of our love? I should have held him with open arms. I offered to look at the others. His blue eyes read relief. I chose my men so as not to compete. Smaller boys, more physical and far less experienced. They delivered pleasure without threat. I hoped he would do the same. He did until he met her. It was my worst fear. Such a perfect woman. Tall. Blonde. With red hair. She had skin, as they say, peach and cream, and big magical brown eyes. If she only had those looks. But she was so much more. I think it's so obvious in her portrait. The sly smile contrasting with the guileless eyes. The combination of her sensuality and her innocence is so appealing that no man can resist. As if teasing me, I recognized what a true heart she has, what a beautiful woman she is. Could a little half-Japanese girl compete with her? And then she made me fall in love with her. At first, it seemed like the affair was over. She had a husband and small children. She didn't want to leave her husband, and Philip didn't ask her to. They loved each other with pure love, wanting the best for each other. But then the husband was gone. Did he find them? Philip moved in with us. I was distraught. Surely now I would lose my love. I had seen how brightly their love burned, and yet they had wonderful little boys to take care of. When I arrived that first weekend in that horrible, uncultured Albany, a blanket of grief and fear hung over the sweet home. The husband was gone, but she was grieving for him and burdened with worries. The little boys were troubled, not understanding their mother's grief. No one wanted to talk about the missing man. We got to some movie where he left the scene, but he was expected back for a happy ending. only perhaps it was a tragedy. Philippe began to play the part of the good and faithful lover to the very end. I look you in the eye when I tell you that I have never been more proud to be the wife of Philippe Dumontet. He didn't give up his love because it was inconvenient or difficult. He loved this woman, she needed help, and he was there for her. It was her husband who somehow failed her. I realized then that Philip would never leave me. No matter what happened, he would always be my Philip. He was the rarest of beings, a truly good man. They say that no Christmas compares to what we experience as children. This is nonsense, because it is what we share with our true loved ones that will always burn brightest in our souls. Karen came to Mont-Royal that year and stole our hearts as well as Philip's. I had no sister, but now I had 1 and 2 little boys to share with my daughters. It was a happy time in a home that was filled with joy. But beneath the joy was a sadness for a man who was far away, in danger that no one spoke of. December 1990 was snowy in Montreal. We made snowmen for the little boys, we took them to a puppet show, and watched the older one try to hide his tears when his father called from afar. He was told he had to be brave like his daddy. Karen only whispered, "Thank God, he's still alive." Your family has become part of our family. I don't regret it. It's the right thing to do. Karen will always be my sister, just like Philip will always be my husband. Nothing you can do will change that, but I hurt my sister because I'm a selfish woman. I'm lost without my Philippe. He is always in my thoughts. That day, I came with her picture to share with Karen. It was reckless. I should have known. Maybe somewhere inside I knew, but I came anyway. We're sorry. We didn't mean to hurt you. I'm lost without my Philip. I need my sister. There's a part of him in her, and I need that part. Please, I beg you, forgive her. It wasn't sin, only love. Avril Dumont broke down. She sobbed uncontrollably. All the grief and loss she had experienced overwhelmed her. She stripped herself bare before me, removed the mask of confidence from her face, and revealed the vulnerable woman that lurked beneath. I was right, she was dangerous. She had real courage and was more than worthy of a man with only physical courage. I took her into my arms. She cried as she clung to me, and I stroked her head like a child. She surpassed me, touched my heart, and quieted my anger. She wounded my pride by showing me her boundless love. We went down the stairs. I carried her in my arms. She was so small, so light, and so brave. Her head rested on my shoulder, and her tears flowed. We found Karen in the first-floor kitchen. When she saw Avril, she screamed at me, "You bastard, what you did to her." They came together, these two women, so different physically but united in spirit. I retreated up the stairs, naked to the core and disturbed to the core. Later, Karen came up the stairs. She knocked softly. "Rob, can I talk to you for a moment to apologize?" she said quietly through the door. When I opened the door, she threw herself into my arms. "Please, please, I'm so sorry," she said, and tears ran down the wool shirt I wore. She tried to explain again, but I stopped her. "There's no need," I said. Avril explained everything. We sat on the strange half couch my son had left behind when he moved to Chicago, and she leaned against me. We were silent for a long time. I had nothing to say, and she was afraid to speak. Finally, it got too hard for her. "What's going to happen to us?" she asked. "I don't really know. I'm too confused." "That seems like more than you can ask of a man," I said. "Could we pretend for a while that this didn't happen? Just until we see if there is a way forward," she said. "And how would that work? Love." She smiled. "If you still love me, we'll find a way." "How long are we going to ignore the past?" "I'm not asking for forever, just until January. I need to help Avril. She's suffering so much, and I feel I owe her. If this hurts you, I'm sorry," she said. "Yes, I'm hurt, but I also sympathize with Avril. All she did was love someone infinitely. I don't believe I could do what she did," I said. Karen started crying again. "I'm so sorry," she said. So began a new period of my life and marriage. Karen was helping Avril with an exhibition of Philip's work. The exhibition was first held in New York, and then was to tour the country. It was a significant project with over 150 works from various owners, collectors, and museums. The opening was scheduled for mid-January. Karen's plan, if it could be called that, was to postpone the confrontation of our problems until the first of the year. In January, Karen and I were to seek marriage counseling. The temporary arrangement was to ignore the problem, to pretend that even though Avril was living in the house while she and Karen were working, what had happened had somehow not happened. It might even have worked, but we hadn't fully taken Avril, her and our families into account. By October 5th, Karen had taken a leave of absence from the state for the rest of the year. I tried to immerse myself in work. A new engine had been developed, completely experimental. If successful, it would allow the plane to reach orbit. It had a thrust of 80,000 pounds. There was only one problem. It never came close to 80. The government got me involved. The university was ecstatic because the contract was huge. The work was supposedly secret, but how could you keep secret a project that thousands of engineers and scientists were already working on? The car itself was a monster. It was not a pretty monster. It sucked air and burned fuel faster than any engine ever built. It was its speed that made it efficient and lightweight, but it never equaled its paper performance. She had her own problems, not unlike my marriage. She was a wonderful distraction, but I tried not to like her. Something told me that my work might have been the reason I'd lost Karen to Philip. After all, that was how I perceived it. Philip had accepted her and loved her. The hidden life they led was a part of her that I would never have. Maybe I was jealous or narcissistic or just plain stupid. I felt that Philip made me second, that what Karen and I had would never compare to what she and he had. Avril was right. I hated him. A man I couldn't know except through his women. It seemed I couldn't escape those women and therefore couldn't escape Philippe Dumontet. The problems began with the arrival of Simone's daughter. First, she arrived with her children, 5 of them. 2 older foster children and 3 of her own. Soon, her husband showed up, and then her sister Suzanne with her husband and 2 children. All of them were happy to see Aunt Karen as they knew her well. The grandmothers were next, Amy Lefebvre, who was 81, Avril's mother, and then Grande Dame Sarah Marie Pascale Dumontet. She was 95, but you couldn't tell that from her. The tall, slender woman was the center of any room she entered. 2 uncles had come just for the holiday, and 4 other cousins, all women in their 20s, had made the trip to New York after Thanksgiving, their Thanksgiving, not ours. The appearance of my oldest son, with his new girlfriend, quite cute and with a Midwestern accent, was not a surprise. The shock was the appearance of Oscar, with his friend Mark in tow. The house, which had seemed empty the week before, was now filled with people. They were all here to celebrate Thanksgiving in October, a Canadian holiday, and to support Avril in what was becoming her life's work, getting Philip the recognition she felt he deserved. Our house became Avril's home. Her family simply swallowed up mine. In my naivete, I still believed that I was living apart and would probably be alone and lonely. Beds were the first problem. There was no problem with the children. Several groups at the university made loft beds for the dorm rooms to expand the space. 4 sets of bunk beds for 2 of the 3 bedrooms on the 3rd floor were not a problem. The beds in those 2 rooms were pushed together. The uncles shared the 3rd bedroom on the 3rd floor. The grandmothers occupied a 2-room guest room on the 2nd floor with a small bathroom. Very convenient, said Mrs. Lefebvre. Oscar, Mark, Kevin, and a girl I think was named Laura occupied the basement with the gym, laundry room, spare kitchen, and hot tub. They slept together in the gym on rented cots. I asked why a girl wouldn't mind sleeping with 3 guys, but got no answer, only a shrug. The cousins took over the living rooms, sleeping on the couches. Avril's daughters and their husbands moved to the 4th floor, leaving the back bedroom on the 2nd floor for Avril, Karen, and me. I only found this out after I got home to the crazy house of people on Thursday night. All the sleeping quarters were already taken, and the whole huge group was dining on pizza from a wood-fired oven from a high-end purveyor on the south side of town. I hadn't gone near our former bedroom since Karen's painting came up. I didn't think I'd ever be able to look at that room the old way again. My day was not going well. The monster sitting in the lab at the university wouldn't speak to me. She was a quiet lady who was not easy to tame. She bothered me. All that power she possessed and so little control. My thoughts were occupied with other things as I entered the house, which had filled to capacity with people just days before. They looked at me with casual familiarity, as if I were a member of this large family that now included my 2 sons and Karen. I felt more alienated from Karen and the boys now than ever before. Had they been mine all these years, or had I shared them? Where do we sleep? I said we were at the very end of the main kitchen, in an aisle formed from an old porch railing. I was feeding 3 cats. 2 were domestic, affectionate and sweet. These 2 belonged to Karen. The 3rd one she picked out herself, but from the beginning, Aggie was mine. No, pet my Aggie. She was named after an agate marble because of her coloring. She was half the size of the others and 10 times the size of a cat. No uninvited mouse, no wayward bat, no pigeon was safe. She knew her territory and kept track of it. Eggie was what every old house needed, a vigilant and fearless protector. Please, the house won't be vacant until next week. We'll all be in Montreal for Christmas, and you can make some excuse if you don't want to come, Karen said. I didn't answer. I felt pressured. Please, that would be too difficult to explain. They don't know how things are. It's only a few days, she said. Okay, I guess I can sleep with my wife for less than a week, I said. Karen averted her gaze, and something told me there was more to it. Karen, what aren't you telling me? Nothing. We just have too few beds to worry about your grievances at the moment. These people don't see things your way. Please don't make a fuss, she said. Karen came out quickly while I tried to finish up with the pets. I tried in vain to corner Avril or Karen that night, but there were too many people, and they all wanted to meet Aunt Karen's husband. Weren't Karen and Avril 2 of the most wonderful women, and wasn't I lucky? What do you do? Sarah Marie demanded, her accent thick, and she was proud of it. Before I could answer, Madame Lefebvre intervened. He's a mechanic and works at the university up on the hill. He fixes their airplane engines, she said, very proud of her information. It was well received. Sarah obviously approved of honest working men. In her opinion, every man could not be an artist. You can't eat paint and canvas, she said. Are they paying you fairly, or do you still have to serve in the military for extra money? Amy Lefebvre asked with a single trace of an accent that was a little more than you were used to hearing. I wondered where she got that information. She knew something, even if not exactly. Yes, they pay me well, and I'm no longer on reserve, I said, which seemed to make them happy. They were 2 delightful people, and I could have spent the night talking, but I needed to find Karen or Avril, but by the time I left, they were nowhere to be found. They had slipped away somewhere. They were up to something. I'm not stupid. Putting Karen next to me was the plan all along. It would be difficult, but I planned to resist temptation. Later I would realize how simple and innocent I was. These 2 women had no trouble achieving their goal. Various family members had no trouble keeping me occupied. I was tired after a long day at work, and not used to socializing with so many people. I decided to stake out a spot in bed, and let Karen find me sleeping when she got to bed. When I got to the bedroom, it was empty. The bed was neatly made, and all of my clothes and personal belongings were neatly organized. A 3rd small dresser appeared, and Karen's closet revealed Avril. This was something I hadn't noticed. I knew they slept together and assumed Avril had found another place to sleep. I fumbled for the only pajamas I had. I wasn't going to sleep in my pants this night. When I got to the bed, I fell asleep immediately. I was too tired for the games the women wanted to play. The dream started innocently. I walked up the hill and entered my laboratory. For some reason, there was no one around. There are guards at the school, but no one was there. There was no engine either, but there was my cat Aggie. She was sitting where the engine should be. Then there was another Aggie, then a 3rd, and finally a 4th. They seemed to be peacefully lined up, but as I approached them, they turned into a huge fire-breathing cat. I shuddered in surprise. I was about to be engulfed in flames. I was sandwiched between 2 women. Another bad dream, Robert, Avril said. An airplane again? Asked Karen. I could feel their breath. No fire-breathing cat, I said. I couldn't turn around or move away from the bed, which was big enough for 2, but had 3 people crammed on it. The women didn't seem to mind. and they were comfortable enough. I knew they had thought this through a long time ago. It was even convenient that Avril was around, and Karen would have to behave herself. I managed to fall asleep again. I'll deal with this in the morning. When I woke up, Avril was already up and showering. The small bathroom in the back bedroom we occupied only had a shower. She walked into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. The women exchanged air kisses, and then Karen noticed that I was awake. Karen leaned over to me and said, "Come with me. It will save time." I was glad I had my pajamas on, watching Avril calmly sit down at the dressing table and brush her hair. My mind felt like it was blocked as I looked at her. She was so small, but absolutely perfect. Karen pulled me out of bed. Two very different women, but both confident. She turned on the water and asked, "Do you want me to take care of everything that happened to us?" I tried by sheer force of will to say no, but my brain nodded, yes. She had a smug, happy wife smile on her face. I had to cut a small moment here so as not to break any rules, but I will remind you that the full stories are on our Patreon. When we came out of the bathroom, Avril had already finished getting dressed. She had put on a crimson lipstick that matched her sly, knowing smile. I'm not stupid. I knew they were setting me up. They maneuvered me. They realized I was attracted to Avril and pushed my buttons. They were so damn sure of themselves and of me. They had that smugness that smart older women have when they're sure of a man. They were so damn sure they were smarter and knew more than the man. I dressed hastily and without breakfast ran up the hill to work. I was happy to have escaped the Dumontet family and Lefebvre. I had work to do. I had an engine to repair. I got everyone together, and the first thing I explained was that the engine needed to be rebuilt. It would no longer be one big monster, but 4 engines in one, sharing an intake and an exhaust. The problem would be getting the fuel to all the chambers evenly. I hoped I had solved my work problem, but I was sure that what awaited me at home was beyond my modest capabilities. The university has formed a team of 16 people for the project. 4 senior PhDs and a dozen graduate students at various levels. We had almost all the specialties needed to build the engine, as well as all kinds of help from a major technical school. We were in an old building. The sports teams had long ago abandoned it and moved to more modern arenas, leaving the huge cavernous building for the monstrous machine that stood where the athletes had once performed. Some weirdo named it Persephone, after the goddess of the underworld. The news of the new design swept over the group like wildfire. It burned up the past and sparked the explosion of the new. The enthusiasm of all these young engineers was overwhelming. For someone whose personal life was in turmoil, it was the perfect distraction. Perhaps too perfect, I realized, when I saw Lisa, my personal assistant, a young woman of about 25, yawn. "What time is it?" I asked. 11:30, Lisa replied. "Impossible. It must be afternoon," I said. "No, PM. It's almost midnight," she said. I looked around. I had 16 men still working like tired spewers. If I let them, they'd work all night, but it wasn't productive. "Everyone, it's time to stop," I called out. "We'll be back tomorrow, but not until noon." I went out last and anchored myself behind the facility. It was a crisp fall night, and the walk was exhilarating. I stopped where the gentle slope on which the university was built transitioned into a steeper slope that led down to the city streets and the river beyond. 11,000 years ago, the Hudson was indeed a mighty river, reaching to where I stood hundreds of feet above its present banks. Now, its smaller course was a silvery ribbon flowing southward. My house, the tallest on the street, silhouetted against the river. Standing high above the house and the river, I realized I was at a tremendous height. A moment had come in my career that I had never even dreamed of. My name will forever be linked to the machine that was being born in the cavernous building behind me. I was happier than a man who had practically lost his home had any right to be. I was working on a job I loved, along with young people who loved it just as much. True, Persephone did not speak to me. She was an indifferent being. Perhaps her rebirth would make her more accessible. The courtyard was dark when I entered through the back gate. The ancient low-voltage floodlights we had installed so long ago were still burning, but they only intensified the night above your ankles. A lone figure, unseen by anyone, waited on the back porch. You're very late. Karen gave up on you. She went to bed shedding tears that you weren't coming back, Avril said from the darkness, just as she turned on the small porch light. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother anyone. I was just immersed in my work. Even in the dim light of the porch, I could see the distrust in her face. What would it take for you to forgive her? Avril demanded. It's a question I don't have an answer to, but that's not the reason I'm late. We've been working on a new engine. The young men are excited about it. They'd work all night if I'd let them. My cell phone rang as if to confirm my words. Hi. Yes, Lisa, I'm home, and it's time for you to go to bed. We're working tomorrow. It's a good idea, but it can wait. Good night, I said as I closed my phone. That's my assistant, I said. She has an idea to remake the fuel lines out of a different material. Avril laughed. I should be jealous, she said. What or who is better? The girl on the phone with the man I was trying to seduce, Avril said, as she got up to walk into the house. I followed her up the stairs to the room I'd shared for years with one woman, and now with two. Avril's remark pierced my brain. I pondered her actions. I tried to make manly sense of them. I dismissed the idea of her hitting on me, but she said, trying to seduce. The table lamp illuminated the room with a warm glow as we entered. See, I brought him. Stop crying, my love, Avril said, covering Karen's face with her hand. I saw that my wife was crying. The new black satin nightgown she was wearing also caught my eye. I had never seen such a thing before. I froze in place. We could use a man, my wife said, making room for me. I began to make my way forward, wondering if this was a dream. No, that's our job. Just come to us. We need you, Avril said. I don't know how long it went on. It seemed to go on forever. I had to cut this moment out a bit too. It ended with 3 exhausted lovers and my utter bewilderment. I was lying down. Very good. Even better than I thought, Avril muttered. Karen replied. Do you do that often? I inquired, for which I received a slap from each of my neighbors. You're an evil person. First you do this to us and then you insult us, Avril said. And all we wanted was to bring you fond memories, Karen whispered. Something special for our man, Avril said. Then we slept. We slept in rapture and contentment. I woke up around 8:30. I would have loved to stay in bed, but someone had to direct what was going to happen today at the old field house. I could have said noon, but I assumed someone in my project would move the time up a bit. 10 minutes later, I was already showered and dressed. I needed a shower. I skipped shaving. Today was Saturday, and I had an engine to assemble. When I emerged from the bedroom, my companions were still sound asleep. The rest of the house, on the other hand, had a lively atmosphere. People seemed to be everywhere. Bonjour, Madame Lefebvre greeted me. Good morning, but why such activity? I asked. You know the young are always at a premium. Did you sleep well? She asked with a slight smile. Yes, isn't it? Pas de deux, I'm just saying. I didn't expect to see you so early. I'm having breakfast with Sarah and Suzanne. How do you like your eggs? Scramble. I was seated in the dining room, or rather, Mrs. Dumont seated me. We were alone when she served me coffee and an omelette worthy of the best restaurant on a plate of ham steak. That's what counts as an omelette when Amy Lefebvre makes it, Sarah Dumonte said with a slight chuckle. We were alone when she sat down at the table across from me. So, tell me, are you still in pain or have your women healed the wound? She asked. When I just looked at her over the plate of extravagant food, she smiled and said, My sister-in-law has a distinctive cry of pleasure, and I can also recognize Karen's grunts. Fortunately, Amy's hearing is fine. But we do talk, you know. We didn't expect to see you this early. I have work at the university today, I said. I think you're running away from your problem. Oh, am I in trouble? But of course my son did that to you. Made her his mistress. Your pain is understandable and, I suppose, justified. However, you are a good man. You are reliable in your actions, and I believe you love your wife with all your heart. And yet we women have robbed you of your pride. It's a difficult problem, she said. The omelette was delicious, and the ham had more flavor than the supermarket. My granddaughter found a good butcher yesterday. We'll have a great turkey on Monday, she said. I think the family will survive. Yes, that's what's important. We have our faith, Ma, our pains, but we find a way to move on. Karen is a good woman. Her sin was committed out of love and need. She has paid for it many times over with guilt. She would do anything to spare you the pain she caused. But we both know that is impossible. It is you who must avoid the next sin, she said, pausing and looking at me with blue eyes that had turned pale with age. And what kind of sin is that? Pride. You have to let it go for them. They need you. They? Don't play the fool with me. These women are closer than sisters. They share an absolute love for a man who is no longer here. They have suffered a great loss. And women like my daughter Avril need to grieve in the arms of a man. And my wife? She needs you more than ever? What about last night? I asked. More cafe? Asked Amy, entering the room with a kettle to fill our cups. Then Amy came over to us, smiling. We discussed Rob's problem, Sarah Dumonte said. Isn't that a happy problem? Asked Amy. He still doesn't feel well, Sarah said. Oh, I'm sorry, Amy said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with hers. But you'll see they're good women and will take excellent care of you. But perhaps you think 2 women are a burden, Amy reflected. I saw a program on your Southern television program about a man with 4 wives. It seemed like a silly burden. Nonsense. Avril and Karen are capable women. They need a man, yes, but they'll give him more than they'll take. It would be foolish to give up what he has, Sarah said. And what have I got? Said I. They both looked at me, but it was Amy who spoke, and it was spoken from the heart. Love is what you have. Their love and our love, now and always. The walk up the hill was steep but pleasant on a sunny fall day. I had agreed with Karen not to make a resolution until the new year, but it was clear that I would be pressured to accept the current situation as a permanent decision. The older women were right. They were trying to convey to me that we can't change the past. Regrets are silly when we are facing today's problems. It's silly to hate a dead man, and it's rather strange that he took my wife and now I have his own as well. But I had to agree with Amy Lefebvre rather than Sarah Dumont. 2 women are a greater burden than 1. Where have you been? I called, greeted Liz as I walked in. I turned my phone off. And what about, not until noon, didn't you understand? Liz only shook her head as a line formed behind her back of people wanting to talk to me. Everyone was here except the 3 true geniuses who wouldn't show up until they'd solved their individual pieces of the puzzle. If they disappeared for more than 2 days, I had to go looking for them to make sure they didn't get sick from the new problems. Leading a team wasn't easy, but at the end of the day, every team has its own problems. You nudge them from the rear and jump forward when the time is right. Step aside when someone else has the ball and manage the team as best you can. The president of the university called at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The news was already out. We discussed the details. It was a 1-year project. Good money for a relatively specific project that employed a few people and generated some additional income. Now things have changed. The government will be happy, but will own it. Our faculty would be recognized, but the university would need to make itself known before the vultures swooped in. I understood the president's concern. She needed to grab as much as she could while we were still in control. How many things are unique to us? She asked. Everything but the original concept. One of the advantages of the team we've assembled is their savvy and independence. As we speak, they are drawing it from scratch, I said. She? Persephone, the engine is our engine, I said, knowing she was shaking her head at what kind of crazy people it takes to run a university. Keep me informed and I'll keep you informed, she said. Lunch showed up in the faculty dining room shortly after I spoke to the president on the phone, and they took dinner reservations. What happened? More than one of my co-workers asked. You've become important. Enjoy it while it lasts. We worked until 9 o'clock in the evening, after which I sent everyone home until 6 o'clock Monday morning. I now had armed guards to enforce the rules, thanks to the administration, which had also started erecting a barrier around the site. The last thing I did before I left was remind Fox that someone should check on the geniuses on Sunday night to make sure they were okay. Leave your phone on, she called out to me. When I walked into the house, Karen was waiting for me. Have you had dinner? She asked. Yeah, we kind of booked it, I said, without explaining anything. I realized that I hadn't said anything to my wife about the most important event in my professional life. "Are you avoiding us?" she asked. We were in the kitchen in the back of the house. I could hear the guests in the front. It's an old house, and sound travels strangely in it. You could hear the sounds of a big, happy family enjoying time together, but nothing of what they were saying. "I've been working," I said. "Late at night on the weekend?" "Yes." She began to cry. "What do I have to do to be forgiven? Do all our years together mean nothing?" I wanted to take her in my arms and tell her everything would be okay, but I'd be lying, because I really had no idea where we were going. Everything had changed so much in such a short time. We were standing on the threshold of a new, very different life. In order to move forward, I had to adjust to the new way of life and recognize that everything that had gone before was not what it seemed. Karen turned and left me alone in the kitchen. I felt the weight of fatigue come over me and realized that I was deep in a dark and treacherous valley in both my life and my work. At that moment, Aggie walked into the kitchen, followed by Karen's 2 cats. She looked at me, very proud of herself. She had a very large field mouse struggling in her mouth. I knew from experience that Aggie likes to play catch and release. A mouse can have many chances before it finally expires, but not this time. She gave a quick flick of her head, and the mouse stopped resisting. She laid her prize at my feet as if to say, "I am your cat, and this is your home. I have brought you my prize." The other 2 cats came up together and sniffed the dead mouse, then turned and followed Aggie out of the kitchen. The head cat came and showed us who was in charge. She was right, my Aggie. She rid the house of mice for me. This was my house, and she was my cat. I made my way to the front of the house. They were all in the big front living room. The conversation stopped when I walked in. "Karen, Avril, upstairs. We're going to bed," I said, and without waiting for a response, headed up the stairs. They followed me. They had no other choice. What was in the past was gone. It could not be brought back, nor could it be changed. That's life, and as Aggie had shown, it's cruel. The Navy made its appearance a week before Christmas. On a morning that was colder than the usual frosty December day in northern New York, Admiral Dan "Kiwi" Dickerson arrived in the company of 2 officers of lesser rank. The last time I saw Dan, he was a lieutenant captain on the Ike. It was the spring of 1992, and the ship was headed to Norfolk for maintenance. The Gulf War, my war, was over. Dan was a flight deck officer, not a pilot. He had a very prominent nose, so he was nicknamed the flightless long-billed bird. He was not the most respected of Ike's officers, but he was the affable officer, whom everyone loves and whose faults are tolerated. "Let me introduce you," Admiral Dickerson began, affable as always. "Rob, meet Commander Jack Marlowe and Lieutenant Allison Patrick," he said, pointing to the officers accompanying him. Commander Marlowe was a tall, thin black man, and Lieutenant Patrick was a petite blonde. She was very well built. Their uniforms were the only military detail in their appearance. If these 2 were once military like me, they had long since become civilians. The blonde had eyes that seemed to move quickly but purposefully. She had a cold smile and was too observant to be anything but a security agent. The man had the soft manners of a professional. "It's been a long time, Dan, and I see you're settling in quite nicely. Let's go say hello to Persephone," I said, leading them to the center of the old field house, where the engine was being lovingly assembled. "What scale are you building this prototype in?" the little blonde-haired lieutenant asked. "Persephone is scale. She's small but strong," I said. We got to the engine. It was only partially assembled, as the parts were made in workshops all over the Northeast US. Very precise puzzle pieces, from which we assembled the Persephone 2.0 model. But her outer shell was in place, the body waiting for her heart and lungs. "How much traction?" asked Dan. "We estimate the pull to be at least 120,000 pounds, I said. "What did you expect exactly?" said Dan. "More, much more," Eddie Davis declared. He was one of the graduate students on the propulsion system. He was tightening the screws of the outer engine housing when he heard the Admiral's comment. Every part was fabricated and fit to the specification my assistants demanded. I may have conceived this baby, but it was up to them to deliver it. "Your men are somewhat oversensitive," Marlowe remarked in an overly professional manner. Of course, I thought, he's a psychiatrist. The admiral, the policeman, and the psychiatrist had come on a call, but what was the true purpose of their visit? It is alleged that this engine consumes a lot of fuel. That is the problem you have been assigned to solve, said the junior lieutenant. That's what the new design solves. That and the need to run air through it, Fox said, joining us. Mind if we look around and ask a few questions? Said Dan. No, you pay, but I need to get back to work. Fox will show you around, I said. And one more thing. Let me treat you and your ladies to an old-fashioned dinner tonight, Dan offered. At that moment I realized who the bell was ringing for, and I was sure it was me. After all, he said the lady, not the only lady. The fleet came for their prize, but without me, we ended up at my house. Karen was already cooking a roast when I called. 3 more wouldn't be a problem. It just so happened that the people I now considered to be the Axe team had arrived at the house. We ate in the formal dining room. My ladies, as Dan called them, were just happy to put on a show. I guess they thought it helped me in my work. The 2 fake officers immediately hooked up with Karen and Avril. They clearly passed Karen's smell test, but not Avril, who seemed to have a sharper sense of deception. She pampered them a bit, especially the fake lieutenant. Everything was going well until we got to dessert. Karen brought a rum cake that she had made from scratch. There was no need for additional alcohol. Avril had dialed the wine cabinet for company, and following French fashion, bought expensive wine to accompany the dishes. Admiral Dan began by taking a good swig of Johnny Walker Black, and then moved on to Burgundy. By dessert time, the Admiral was already sitting in his cups and telling war stories to everyone gathered. Had he confined himself to his own tall tales, the whole thing might have slipped by. But mine seemed to be much more interesting. So, the crew chief is under the A-1, the subsonic bomber, and Iceman, who's Rob, is checking the engine mount when his landing gear fell off. I swear to God, half the men on the flight deck pissed their pants. But not Iceman. The airplane couldn't even get within fingertip distance of him, but he just moved on to the next airplane. What happened to the crew chief? Asked Avril, crushed like a bug. But if you want my opinion, more fortunate was the midshipman who lost his legs to a broken cable 3 days later. He bled to death while Rob held his hand. Gee? I watched the blood drain from Avril's face, and Karen's face turn into a stone mask. Perhaps this isn't the best after-dinner conversation, suggested the commander. I find our host's heroics very interesting, said the lieutenant. It's hardly heroic when you're just avoiding death, I said. Oh, it's nothing like that, Robbie. Billy Pascal works at the Pentagon. Every day he talks in the bar to anyone who'll listen about that flight over the Persian Gulf he took you on. They're at 30,000 feet at Mach 1 speed when the engine cuts out. Billy does a restart. Nothing, then nothing again. Time to go, he says. But the poor guy is flying the Iceman. Do it again. Comes from the second seat. Nothing. Now try it without fuel. Well, here Billy pees his pants and decides it's too late anyway, so he does it without fuel. Well, doesn't the engine start? Billy swears that as they were climbing back up, they got hit by a wave. Bad fuel, I guess. It didn't affect the stock. Having finished his story, Dan leaned back in his chair, proving some thesis that had eluded me. The lieutenant touched her wine glass. It's strange what a man can do in a crisis. Some men, if you push them, they just thrive, she said, looking at me. Many men die in war for no purpose, because accidents and bullets happen. Women lose their husbands and children lose their fathers, Avril said with fury. I assumed some of that anger was directed at me, but the commander tried to look away. Risk is inevitable if we are to function in life. Every activity involves some risk, he said, not realizing he had dragged me into it. The lieutenant, however, immediately picked up on it. I was just pondering the matter this afternoon. A small engine, completely untried, and it puts out over 100,000 pounds of force. What happens, Professor, if something goes wrong? Why would anything go wrong? I shot back a little too quickly. You expect an engine named after the Queen of Hell to start the first time? The lieutenant said. I looked at Avril and Karen, whose eyes were fixed on me. I never thought she would fail, I said to these 2 women who I realized at that moment loved me and who I loved. She will not fail. We won't let her. But it's possible. What if it is? said the commander. Excellent question, Doctor. I'm sorry, but you don't wear your uniform any better than Miss Patrick, said Avril. Let's just say they won't have to tear down that house on the field for the new stadium they're planning to build, Dan said, seeming to sober up a bit as he rejoined the conversation. Rob has always been a risk taker, and that's your main problem, Dan said. So I'm taking a risk. Is that the official line? One of several. There are other safety and identity issues, Patrick said. Am I a security risk? Asked Avril. Just one of them. You're a foreign national and a communist, but Karen's former connections are just as troubling. And then there's the unstable set of weirdos working on the engine. The chief assistant is a strange damsel who's never had a relationship that lasted longer than a week. The rest of the staff seem like social deviants. I think you're going too far, Special Agent, Dr. Marlowe said. Granted, the engine design team seems to have been selected on the principle of social awkwardness, but they are not deviants per se. I commend you, sir, for your ability to manage such a group. Oh, that's Rob's forte. They'd follow him anywhere. 4 people died, and they were still jumping when he called the Gulf. But there's something about leaders who take risks. Of course, it helps if you're as lucky as Rob, Dan said. Luck is up to you, I said. Are you going to tell us superstitious nonsense about how the engines talk? Said Dan. Why should I bother? You're obviously taking the project somewhere else. May I ask where? It's a secret, Agent Patrick said. I'm sorry, but there's too much at stake, Dan said. I would have protested the injustice of stealing other people's labor, but I'm glad the evil creature is leaving, Avril said. That pretty much ended the conversation, but not the project. The weirdos never got over the fact that they had been replaced. They continued the work on their own. Persephone had her own priests and priestesses. They collected her slowly, but slow and steady action often wins the race. It was late Christmas Eve, or rather, early Christmas morning. The house in Mount Royal was asleep. It was a big old house, not as big as ours in Hudson, but big. It had 3 ancient floors filled with visiting relatives. I was around Karen and Avril again by necessity, but the chill that had set in, especially with Avril after dinner with the Admiral, was still very evident. Those who could now be called my extended family were aware of the problem, but did not understand the cause. The only break in the coldness that prevailed between my wives and me came when my son Oscar sat me down and informed me that he was marrying his longtime life partner. Mark, Karen, and Avril sat next to me, holding my hands. It was much less of a shock than they had realized. Moreover, I had nothing to do with it, except to wonder if my son's reserved behavior toward me was due to his orientation. It seemed unfair, as if he was prejudiced against me. It ended with me hugging them both. Oscar's disclosure provided a very brief respite in the Cold War being waged by women. It was frustrating because I understood the problem, but there seemed to be nothing I could do to solve it. I've always found it difficult to stand up to one woman. When you have 2 opposing you, the fight becomes even more difficult, and even more pointless, because I was agreeing with their position. Persephone was an illicit love. She would take me away from my family if she could. I was a late middle-aged man, salivating over a dangerous young mistress. My women resented her, and resented my attraction to her. Karen and Avril feared what my new mistress might do to me, and desperately demanded that I reject her. Canadian Christmas Eve went well. I enjoyed the day and the family. I was content sitting by the fire in the small guest living room. I was in the front of the house looking out over the street of Montreal. It had just started snowing. I saw a figure reflected in the window pane. It was only a vague shape, but I knew the figure, and I loved it. She hesitated in the doorframe for a moment and then came toward me. Once again I was struck by how small Avril was. I've tried, but I can't help it, she began, and then stopped to look into my eyes. Her face was beautiful in the glow of the dying fire. I love you, she said. That's stupid, because as a man you're always going to hurt women. Why would you believe the boasts of a man who lives in fiction about a past that was not at all what he recalls? In that place and in that time I lived. The fire burned hot, but I lived through it. Those flames are yesterday's conflicts. Sometimes they still haunt me in my dreams, but never when I feel your loving arms around me. You and Karen are the ones begging to put the past behind you. So let that past be in the past. The dead will never come back to life. Blood will never be spilled. The foolishness of youth shall be redeemed by the wisdom of age. I am content at last. Why shouldn't you be content too? But the new machine is dangerous. You hid it from us and named it after the devil. You will choose her over us. She's just a drawing on an easel, parts waiting to be assembled. When she is ready, others will take over. Younger souls who will risk everything and dance their dance with death. I'm too old, and everyone seems to know it except you and Karen. You promise? Karen said, wrapping her arms around my neck and pressing her cheek against my cheek. I didn't hear her enter the room. Are we okay? Asked Karen. It was obvious she was addressing Avril, who nodded her head and snuggled into my arms. He promised. He's true to his word, Avril said with a new hope in her voice. With those words, I sat Persephone down behind me. Karen came over and sat on the floor, leaning her back against us. The three of us sat and watched the Christmas snow fall on a Montreal street. I realized this was a new and permanent love. Epilogue. The main exhibition gallery was crowded with prominent members of the artistic class. Philippe Dumonte's exhibit, Restoration and Innovation, was open for viewing. I had no idea this man had such a large body of work. His wife and mistress lovingly displayed his work. For the past week, Avril and Karen had been working around the clock to put it all together. It seemed that every day brought them a new crisis. Now their efforts were rewarded with the approval of the assembled cultural elite. I'm afraid I watched the movie with a mixture of resentment and jealousy of my dead rival. But I had to admire the man and his work. They were mostly modern and abstract works, but there was one classic painting, a portrait of his mistress in all her glory. She was on the cover of the museum catalogue and took center stage in the exhibit. My wife, but undoubtedly his mistress. I have accompanied my ladies to evening celebrations, stood under speeches, applause, and watched my women bow out. I heard them tell the enthusiastic crowd about their Philips. It was a tough night for me, especially when Karen spoke. The two women stopped at the back of the crowd in front of Karen's picture. They say she was already married then, the woman said. A very understanding husband, perhaps? Replied her companion. Very understanding, Karen whispered in my ear, taking my hand. Avril walked over and took my other hand. Time to take you somewhere cozy. It's been a busy day, she said. Fine, and I'll make you two pay for this evening, I said. The sun had already risen. The first stage had been passed. The alkaline plains of the Black Rock Desert began to reflect the heat. The maintenance crew flanked the short, fat vehicle. The Persephone 5 was nothing like the previous speed record contender, but on its first run that morning, it had easily broken the existing record and raced at an incredible 1,000 miles per hour. I hope these weirdos know what they're doing, said crew chief Al Sporan. He was a 25-year veteran of American aviation. Test pilot Phil Hart had taken him along, for the ride, as he called it. Sporan had almost nothing to do. The car, or rather its engine, was maintained by a dedicated group of technicians. From what she did this morning, I'd say they must know something, Hart replied. But the government had bad luck with this engine, Sporan said, in his deep, even voice, making no mention of the 3 men and 1 woman who died before bureaucrats at the Pentagon deemed the costs too high to proceed. A Persephone supporter took her blueprints and a new set of specifications to an abandoned warehouse in Buffalo, New York, and 2 years later, Persephone 5 appeared. She was transported to the plains of Nevada and began testing. Phil Hart was in the sunset of his career and was hoping to emerge with a record that would be worthy of respect. Persephone promised to send him to the other side of the world with a loud sound, one way or another. The only thing that bothers me is the noise during the first race, Hart said. Noise? Some whispering sound, like she's talking. Sporan only shook his head. They had never used the word et in reference to this monster. Persephone was definitely she, and when she came to life, she was as fast, fluid, and powerful as hellfire. It is very likely that she will take you there as well. Persephone was ready. Hart walked to his car and buckled in, after which man and car were towed to the place where the return run across the salt marsh was to begin. The second run required for the record. The sun was already up when Hart made his final checks and counted down the time to the start. Persephone came to life. She had broken the sound barrier and was already past the 1,000 mile per hour mark when Hart heard her. "Faster, faster, faster," she said, a passionate lover. As we bring the curtain down on the second chapter of our gripping narrative, the emotional landscape of our characters grows deeper, revealing the complex interplay of love, loyalty, and personal growth. The dinner conversation between Karen and Rob, interspersed with Rob's haunting memories and Avril's unexpected visit, serves as a poignant reminder of the indelible scars left by both love and war. In this chapter, we see the transformative power of vulnerability and the courage it takes to confront one's demons. Karen's candid confession, Avril's raw display of grief, and Rob's introspective journey highlight the intricacies of human relationships and the resilience needed to navigate through the storm of past mistakes and missteps. Keep in mind, I remind you again, that this is only the first ending of this story, and there is a second ending, which is in this same playlist at the link in the description. The psychological analysis of these events reveals the complex dance between forgiveness and understanding. It demonstrates the human capacity for empathy, forcing us to consider the strength to be found in recognizing our weaknesses. As Rob struggles with his own fears and prejudices, his internal struggle mirrors the external conflict, illustrating the universal quest for redemption and the search for a place of belonging. Avril's poignant story, intertwined with Rob's introspective reflections and Karen's silent strength, emphasizes the complexity of love's many forms. It makes us think about the boundaries we place on love and how it can transcend those boundaries, creating bonds that defy conventional understanding. As we move from tumultuous conflict to the promise of reconciliation, our characters embark on a journey of self-discovery. They face the shadows of their past, finding solace not in erasing their experiences, but in accepting and integrating them into their lives. This chapter serves as a testament to the transformative power of love, the resilience of the human spirit, and the strong bonds that bind us together. For those who want to delve deeper into the depths of this story, the full version is available on our Patreon. Join us for even more stories like this and better stories. Remember that in the realm of love and life, the journey never ends, it only transforms, leading us to new understandings and unpredictable paths.